Hi, Ose. Good morning, Dr. Kadiri.
Morning.
Kenneth Silk, Godwin Omoaka, Folabi Kuti. Welcome, everyone. We're here once again at the Business Day NBA-SBL EIR Committee webinar. We're going to be focusing on mental health this time. The last time we talked about remote working, and it was very engaging, and we got a lot out of it. We're hoping to have the same sort of engagement this time, and fruitful as usual, and we look forward to everyone participating. Please, the moderator will take over from me. If you have any questions, feel free to drop your questions in the Q&A section at any time. Welcome once again. Welcome to our panelists, and welcome to all the participants. Ose will take over from me now to start this engagement. Ose, thank you. Thank you to SBL. Thank you to the EIR committee for partnering with us. And we're happy about these engagements that we're having. We look forward to a fruitful session once again. Please carry on, Ose.
All right. Thank you ever so much, Theodora. It's ever so nice to hear from you and to work with you. It's been quite an interesting partnership, and we're very grateful for the platform that's helped us to achieve some of our objectives. I'd like to welcome you once again, just like Theodora said, to this particular webinar. We'll be taking on an understated issue, but one that is very, very, very important. Because if you think about it, the World Health Organization says that to be healthy, there has to be a balance between your physical health and your mental health, which creates the perfect well-being. And so to that extent, we understand how important mental health is. Well, firstly, I want to thank the panelists who have taken time to be with us today. Dr. Kadiri, Godwin Omoaka, SAN, Folabi Kuti, and the backroom staff of Business Day for the fantastic job they do. Onye and team, thank you very much. We're very grateful. But just to start, I need to put this in context with some facts and figures. As of 2019, the World Health Organization had this study and research that showed that 1 out of every 4 Nigerians have mental health issues, which if you do the math and extrapolate, that comes to about 50 million people looking at our population. That in itself is worrying. Just a couple of days back, Well-Meaning published a study which was published in Business Day on Friday, which says that 4 out of every 5 employees is at risk of mental health issues in Nigeria. And then it says that 8% of the workforce, which was one of the highest in the world, Nigeria is prone to depression. And if you look at the world indices and benchmark, it's actually 4%, but Nigeria has 8%. Those figures, those statistics are actually quite worrying. And then I then asked myself, is there a link between the sudden upsurge in suicides in Nigeria and mental health issues? Because if you think about it again, Nigeria is rated 15 on the index of worldwide suicide cases in the world. And if you put all that together, you then ask yourself, is there a connection? Is there a connection between this and mental health? So to help us drill these issues down, I would then start with Dr. Kadiri. Again, I would say mental health is one of the most misunderstood concepts in Nigeria. Somebody says to me, I'm depressed. Are they actually depressed or they are low?
Again, good day, everyone, and it's great to be a part of this awesome gathering. I would say congratulations to everyone that is on board today, because we are alive. We do understand that there's a global pandemic where we are having the good, bad, and the ugly side. The ugly side is that people are dying and people will keep dying, and that's just the truth. But the beauty about it is that a lot of us are beginning to learn a lot about ourselves individually, how to reach out to people, and how to stay alive. I'm happy Ose is able to roll out some very relatable statistics ordinarily, if not because of this program. I'm sure you wouldn't really mind about what mental health is and how people are coping and what statistics we are actually having in the society. But it's telling us, look, 1 out of every 4 Nigerians will have a mental health related challenge in their lifetime. And about 50 million Nigerians are currently dealing with mental health related challenges. But the truth is that what we are currently experiencing is the discrimination and stigma attached to people living with mental illnesses. And that in itself is not encouraging help-seeking behavior. But if we do understand what mental health is and be able to differentiate it from what mental illness is, it will help each and every one of us to know when to take charge, to encourage help-seeking behavior, and to be able to seek help from the right people, the right place, and of course, the right time, which is now. So what generally is mental health? Mental health, according to the World Health Organization, is the ability for an individual to, number 1, realize your potentials in life. Number 2, deal with the day-to-day stresses of life. Number 3, work productively and fruitfully. And last but not the least, the ability to give back to the society. Awesome definition. It just means that all of us here as panelists and all of us here as participants, we all have mental health. Because in one way or the other, we have been able to know our abilities and our potentials and how to deal with the day-to-day stressors. We may not have it all together 100%, but in one way or the other, we'll be able to discover those options to deal with the day-to-day stressors and work productively. Now, this is the catch. Mental health is not the absence. Having mental health does not mean that it's the absence of mental illness. It just means that some people may have mental illness, but they can work productively and fruitfully. While some people will not have mental illness, they cannot work productively and fruitfully. What that just means is that there are some people that cannot work productively, not because they have a mental illness, but because the wheel of wellness is not just about your physical, mental, psychological, spiritual well-being. It also involves your family, your career, finances. So you may have not some level of good mental health, but you can't work productively or fruitfully because you are dealing with all the challenges. And you may have a mental illness just because you realize you have it, you are able to deal with it, you go to your doctors, maybe you are on medication or you are in counseling, you are able to work. Now, this is where the big issue is when it comes to differentiating it. Since we all have mental health, we do not have mental illness. Reason because statistics have shown 1 out of every 4 Nigerians will have a mental illness. 1 out of every 5 Nigerians is currently dealing with depression. And in the workplaces, 80% of employees are currently at risk of mental illness. 1 out of every 3 are more at risk of stress. 1 out of every 5 more at risk of financial issues. And of course, 1 out of every 12 are more at risk of depression. And how does that impact the workforce? The bottom line is that productivity is affected, and the resultant profitability for their organization is definitely going to be affected. So hence, the putting or creating a mentally healthy force is paramount now and in the future. Because if we do not put that into what we have in the COVID period or even the post-COVID period, we are definitely going to lose more hardworking employees, not because they cannot work or they don't have the requisite skills to do what they are supposed to do, but because their mental health is affected, they are not able to deliver. And if the employer does not grab this concept of creating a mentally healthy workforce for the employees, because they are the bottom line of that organization, it gets eroded, and the profitability you are expected from that employee will not, because there will be more increase in absenteeism, presenteeism. Then of course the head cost of that organization will be enormous. Most organizations have the HMO, but you find out that your employees will definitely be using the health insurance more than usual, because the World Economic Forum has not told us that if you create a mentally healthy workforce, for every $1 you put into your organization, you get $4 back. So if $1 in Nigeria context is 400 naira, then that means for every 400 naira you spend on your staff, you are going to get 1,200. But of course, I will leave that in the course of this discussion to elaborate on how every organization can actually create a mentally healthy workplace.
Thank you very much, Dr. Maymunah. I'm really, really grateful for that insight. And again, the part that worries me is the legal framework for mental health in Nigeria.
Yeah.
Historically, the first we had was in 1916, and it was called the Lunacy Ordinance.
Yeah.
And by 1958, it became the Lunacy Act, which a lot of states have now replicated in their various states. I know there was an attempt in 2003 for a new bill, a mental health bill, but that did not sail through. And so the only other aspect you look at again would be Section 28 of the Criminal Code, which talks about insanity. Yeah. So if you put it together, the kind of words, very negative in terms of concept, lunacy, insanity, around mental health creates a somewhat negative vibe. So Godwin, my question to you really, what is the legal framework for mental health in Nigeria, particularly as it has to do with employment law and practice?
Thank you, everyone, and I hope you can hear me.
Yes.
I mean, okay, like you rightly stated, this is an understated issue, and it's an issue that will gradually eat into the productive capacity of the Nigerian workforce. So it's very important that employers, governments at all levels begin to deal with the reality of the situation and begin to address it. But let me come to the specific question that you've asked me, which is the legal framework for mental health issues in Nigeria. Well, you mentioned the Lunacy Act, which was an ordinance in 1916, and then it metamorphosed into an act in 1958. Now, like you rightly mentioned, there were attempts to amend it in 2003. That attempt did not scale through, and that attempt is still ongoing as of today. In 2019, they have the Mental Health Bill. It's a very long title. I can't pronounce it. It's very long, but it's the Mental Health Bill for short, and it's still before the National Assembly. And the whole essence is to deal with the shortcomings that are available in the Lunacy Act, which, as we know, is an old act and almost over 100 years old now. 1916, that was when it came as an ordinance. So you can imagine between 1916 to 2020, we still have a statute in our books, in our law book, which have not been amended. But in relation to employees, we will have to look at the Employee Compensation Act, which provides for compensation for mental health injuries, right, to employees. Specifically, Section 8(1) and 2 talk about mental stresses suffered in the course of employment by an employee. And then if you go to the definition section, it talks about permanent disability and all of that. That way it tries to define permanent physical disability and mental health. But again, the Employees Compensation Act, because it's not focused on mental health, is clearly inadequate. It does not address all of the whole issues. Then, of course, we have the Labor Act, which is the primary legislation in Nigeria that governs employment matters in Nigeria. Then, interestingly, also, we have the National Health Act 2014, which is very relevant, especially when it comes to...
Okay. I think Godwin would sign back in. Folabi, I'll come to you, right?
Yes.
From an employer point of view, what are the obligations of an employer when it comes to mental health? And again, I put in the context again, in the event of a mishap, right? Can the employer be held liable for failing to provide a safe work environment in line with the ILO Convention 155 and 161, which is all part of the Decent Work Agenda, and also in line with National Occupational Health Policy Framework, which looks at psychological well-being. So really, what are the obligations of the employer when it comes to mental health in regards to the employee?
Okay, thank you very much, Ose. Again, very good afternoon to the fellow panelists and then every participant on this webinar. It's quite an interesting one. Just before I bite at the question you just posed, let me say that there were some staggering information, pieces of information that you earlier let out. I didn't know until now, and I think Dr. Kadiri eventually came on to scare us the more. Everyone out of every 4 Nigerians is mentally challenged. I think I will have to go and evaluate as well, that I don't fall into that fraction. And of the truth, in the light of the global public health crisis, one can imagine that depression will be on a spike, and it's expected that more and more Nigerians will be within that borderline if they are not depressed anyway. So that's for sure. I just thought I'd highlight that. Now, your question is basically as to the legal obligations. But you see, we cannot talk about legal obligations without first starting from what is the legal framework. And I'll just quickly address that in a minute so that I can travel to where we can even derive this legal obligation. Earlier on, there's been a focus on the various laws dealing with mental laws and all of that. And I actually just want to, at this point, just mention that those laws deal with treatment of mental illness. Now, let's relate them to the workplace. One of the obligations of the employer is always to guarantee and to ensure that employees are in good mental states. And the employee, as defined by International Labour Organization conventions, all the conventions recognize that a rounded individual, a rounded employee, who is one who is in good physical and mental condition. So they go hand in hand. But unfortunately, maybe this is why I would perhaps want to slightly depart from the learner's circle as to the state of our laws. I don't think we have any law in Nigeria dealing with mental workplace. And I'll say that in context. Now, there are 3 laws I would like to publicly highlight. The Labour Act made in 1974 is almost like absent. It's absent provision that you have in the Labour Act. Then you leave the Labour Act, you probably want to consider the Factories Act. The Factories Act provides for minimal standard of health and safety in factories. Health and safety in factories. Then you come to the Employment Compensation Act. Now, Employment Compensation Act is addressing the context of accidents, injury, disability. So put it this way, it's always looking at treatment. It's not looking at how do you prevent. And medical doctors will tell us that the modern way now, the context now is to preventive medicine. So that is what you now begin to look at the context of legal obligations of the employer at work. Now, the legal obligations, since I just highlighted that in our local legislations, you would hardly find any provision that you say has provided for a rich landscape that the employee can readily make recourse to. So what that leaves us is perhaps to travel to see what international labor legislation says. Since thankfully, the court, the labor court that is to adjudicate in the event of any dispute around this area or any controversy has been given the power to look elsewhere, to travel abroad and apply international best labor practices and international conventions that Nigeria has ratified, even though it has not been domesticated into local law. So it is in the light of that I always like to look at good mental health in the context of how some English decision, Joan Lamb and Garrard Academy, looking at the international convention you mentioned, which I'll come to in a moment, had said that the obligation that is imposed on the employer is such that he must at every point in time make reasonable adjustments, facility to enable the employee operate at the optimal best. That is, there is need to always evaluate in different ways that the employee is in a good mental state. There is not, you lessen the pressure, burden, and attendant stress that could come off and a rare phenomenon we are facing, the pandemic, and then see at every point in time to access employee to find out that is in a good mental condition. It's one of the obligations that I can tell you that is directly imposed, and that is from the context of that case, which I looked at Convention 155 and Convention 161, both of the ILO made at different times, with emphasis on occupational safety and health, and particular emphasis on health impairment, that it must be, the facilities must be together, not just that it looks very okay physically to be able to attend to the nature of work that is, to whatever work task or schedule is, but at the same time to ensure that the facility, the mental faculties, they are in very good, perfect condition. So that is directly the option that has been imposed in the light of both decision and then the ILO convention. Now, as to whether there can be, and it followed to that, I think there was a question as to what in the event, whether can be made liable to, can be made for failing to provide a safe environment as prescribed. Of course, the answer is in the affirmative. The employer can be made liable in the event of failing to provide a safe environment, because the provision of a safe environment and healthy condition is already provided for in our local law. But as to now relate it to health impairment and good mental health condition for the employee, and in the light of ILO Convention 155 and 161, which basically, the one was made in 1981, the other one 1985, but Nigeria has ratified both, and both focus on occupational health services. And part of occupational health services, in fact, the 1985 convention started by introducing that health would be seen in the context of adaptation of work to the capabilities of the workers in the light of their state of their physical and mental health. The state of their physical and mental, there's a lot of emphasis on physical and mental health in virtually all the provision of that. And in some of the decisions that we've been saying, it is in the light of that the court has actually been felt comfortable to say that, look, if it is in the event of facts before the court, I forgot to mention that it is not an automatic relief. It is fact dependent. It is based on the premise of fact that is submitted to the court in the event of any need to resolve a dispute that will now be looked at in the context. Is there any shortcoming? Has there been any gap? Is there anything that the employer could have done better? Has there been a duty of care, a breach of a duty of care? Let me borrow that from the law, because the employer and the employee, the relationship between both, clearly the duty of care that is imposed on the employer to always ensure that at every point in time, the work environment is safe, in the same working condition, and the employer is in good physical and mental condition to be able to discharge the work. So that would be.
Thank you very much, Folabi. Quite exhaustive there. Dr. Maymunah, I'm back to you now. Okay. Now, for some people, work was respite. Mm. So leaving the house to go to office was some form of respite for them. And so those triggers that could trigger mental health issues which were present at home was avoided. Now, due to lockdown, a lot of people have had to spend much more time with, I wouldn't say abusers, but the triggers of those mental health issues. Now we're going back to work. So what are the practical intervention tools that an organization might need to put in place to actually care for some of these issues? And really, what are these kind of triggers?
In the triggers in the workplace, you mean, or at home?
At home, triggers at home.
Oh, there are so many triggers in the sense that, thank you for that question, which is very pertinent, because as much as we do understand that the work environment can be a trigger in itself, from job harassment, sexual harassment, bullying in the workplace, work overload, and so many other things. The individual that is in the workplace is also the same individual that is at home. And there are some people that are ordinarily at risk before starting work. 2/3 of our working hours, as far as you are in that productive age group where you started work, you spend it in the workplace. So it then means that creating a healthy workplace is very, very good for our mental health, because that is where 2/3 of your working hours are. So the individuals that are working there, a lot of them, some of them rather, could already be at risk of one form of mental illness or the other. And then the workplace will not be like a trigger. So this is what the World Health Organization. So let's go back to the World Health Organization. It's telling us that half of all mental illnesses start before the age of 14. It means if we have 100 mental health diseases in the world right now, 50 will start before you turn 14 years of age. And two-thirds, meaning 75% of it, before you turn 24. That means people in the workplaces, some of us are already predisposed. And what are these predisposing factors that we could have before starting work at age 20 or 21 or 22, depending on when people get to leave school much earlier these days? What are these predisposing factors? Coming from a home where there's domestic violence, we talked about domestic violence now. So you can imagine coming from a home where there was domestic violence, and right now as you are working, there's not domestic violence. So you have two things against you. Previous history, which you are already traumatized on, and then a current history. Then coming from a home where there was divorce, father leaving mom or mom leaving dad. Coming from a home where you were sexually abused, and you know the increase in rate of rape now, child molestation, child abuse. These are predisposing factors. Another predisposing factor is family history. So oftentimes when you go to the hospital and people ask any history of diabetes, hypertension, you are very glad to release all those information. Yes, my grandfather, my great-grand-aunt. But when they ask any history of mental illness, you are almost slapping the doctor. Why can you ask me any history of mental illness? Are you trying to say that our family members have mental illness? But the truth is, mental illnesses also have a familiar genetic predisposition. So you can imagine if people are already predisposed, and now the trigger could be financial challenges, relationship challenges, job harassment, harassment in the workplace, bullying in the workplace, financial and other. So why would an employee or an employer ensure that they create a mentally healthy workforce? You do not have all the information that your employees have. That's just the truth. You can't, even if you do investigation on your staff, you will not know everything that your staff is going through, or their past medical history, or even their past mental health related history. But this person is working in this environment and is finding joy or solace working here. But right now, because of the lockdown, the remote working, they can't really express, go to this workplace, and now they're at home. Lockdown, keep safe, but they're actually, in the real sense of it, some of them are not even safe because of domestic violence, toxic relationship, hostile home environment, and the home climate is not accommodating. So how would employer ensure that they are able to help employees in creating mentally healthy workforce? The truth is that globally, depression and anxiety have a significant economic impact, and the estimated cost is about 1 trillion per year in lost productivity. So if an employee understands that, we should be able to look at the work-related risk factors in the workplace that can affect any of your employees. And what are those things? Inadequate health and safety policies, poor communication and management practices, limited participation in decision-making or low control over one's area of work, low levels of support for employees, inflexible working hours, and of course, unclear tasks or organizational objectives. And how can you ensure that you are going to help these employees? Let's use the PPA approach. PPA approach just generally means promoting, preventing, and of course, assessing good mental health. So how the best way to be able to do this is to help employees or employer of labor to see how they can create a healthy workforce by looking at this three-pronged approach. Protect mental health by reducing work-related risk factors that I just listed above. Promote mental health by developing positive aspects of the workplace and of course the strength of your employees. Nobody is useless. You just have to harness the strength of that employee. And of course, address mental health problems regardless of the cause of what this person is going through. To make it easier and build a better work, mentally healthy work environment, because it's to the benefit of the employer as against every other person. Yes, it's from top down, both employer and employee, because you as an employer of labor, you're also an employee in your work environment. To make it easier, let's use the NBA-SBL approach. What do I mean by the NBA-SBL approach? It's just an acronym so that it is easy for us to relate. If you look at the three-pronged approach I just talked about, promote mental health, protect mental health, promote mental health by developing the skills and addressing it. If we want to look at the NBA-SBL approach, the first rule there is not reinventing the wheels by being aware of other companies who have taken action. Ose, I can tell you for free, we have the Employees Assistance Program in Nigeria. We have been registered with the CAC since 2015. This means 5 years going now. Most of the people that are on board of the Employees Assistance Program, which is a service deployed for organization in helping the mental health of status of their employees. It creates a safe space. It creates a non-judgmental place where they can vent, where they can relate, where they can talk to. Most Nigeria employers have not yet gotten it right. To them, they just feel that it's a waste of money. To them, they just feel that, oh, they don't need it. But the productivity of the employees are being affected, but they're not looking at that service. They would rather look at bringing in a musician. They'll pay like 5-10 million to get. They'll rather look at other services. Welfare package is beautiful, but the EAP, which I'm going to dive in much later, for me is the way to go. It's available in Nigeria. It is registered. Corporate organizations have logged in. In fact, we have some law firms that have logged in. I don't know if they are here, but of course, the oath I've taken, unless they tell me to say it, I will not bring that. But I do know there are law firms that have logged on board on that platform right now. So if you are going to look at this three-pronged approach I've just talked about, and break it down, the 6 rules using the NBA-SBL approach, because it's an acronym I just want us to quickly align with. The N here is not reinventing the wheels by being aware of other companies who have taken action, like what I said. And then the B here is building policies, building better policies in the workplace by understanding the opportunities and needs of individual employees. If we understand that, we'll be able to build policies that will help us, and there are policies that can, especially now that we know that there are some legal framework that we can leverage on. The A here is awareness of the workplace environment and how it can be adapted to promote better mental health for different employees. We are all unique in our own ways. For what is good for employee A is different from what is different from employee B. And the S here is developing sources. And what are these sources? Sources of support and where people can find help. Yes, when somebody asks, I want to open a bank account, it's very easy. Oh, go to GTB, go to Access. Or somebody said, I want to do my hair, the hairdresser. Somebody said, I want to do, take my children to university, the countries you recommend and the different universities. But when somebody says, I want to source for counseling because I've lost a loved one, they're like, is it that bad? The person is dead now. Why would you even seek for support? These are the things organization under the HR department should also have a list of where employees should be able to reach out to. If you do not have the EAP service, you should be able to deploy those, that source or the sources of where employees can reach out and get help. That is the S. The B here is building connection, building connectivity in the workplace from bottom up and from top down. Because that disconnect between the managers, the supervisors, the organs at the top, it breaks the mental resilience of employees. And we do understand the importance of building mental resilience in the workplace and how it boosts productivity and profitability at the end of the day. The last but not the least is the L. The L here is learning from motivations of organization, now leaders and employees who have taken action. And what are the actions we are talking about? The ability for a work environment to talk freely on mental health. Not necessarily when somebody is talking about, I think I'm depressed or I think I need help, you are looking at him with, that Nigerian context, corner eye, like, this person is not, it shouldn't be in this environment. The next thing, a banana peel is said, the next thing the person is giving you have done X, Y, Z, the next thing the person is being sacked. Because people do not naturally come out to talk about what they feel, how they feel, and what it is. Because the truth is that our thoughts influence our emotions and our emotions influence our behavior. And if you are not bankable emotionally, it's a problem. How many of us are emotionally bankable? We are about 85 participants in this forum now. How many of us are emotionally bankable? At the beginning of the year, we did strategies for our businesses. We did strategies for how to build a new house, how to buy a new car, or how to ensure you go to Jermaine or Mercedes Place or repaint your house. But how many of us intentionally and deliberately banked on our emotion? And what does that just mean? It just means that you deposit when you are in abundance, and when you are in deficit, you withdraw. That's just it. It's common sense. It's common mass. But how many of us generally bank on our emotion?
I have to cut you off a bit now so I can go to the next question. So I'm conscious of the timing. Okay, Godwin, over to you now. The question is an employee under obligation to disclose their mental health issues to their employer? Again, the pre-employment health check under Section 8 of the Labor Act, does that include a health check for mental illness? And again, this is not the case, but in some cases, people who suffer from mental health issues are known to be harmful to themselves and to third parties. If it then becomes the case that a third party is harmed in the course of employment, is the employer vicariously liable for the act of that employee? And would the employee be able, I'm not talking of insanity here, but some mental health issues, would the employee be able to claim the defense of insanity, Section 28 of the Criminal Code?
Thank you very much, Ose. Sorry you lost me the other time. There were the heavy rains, and it caused instability in the internet fluctuation. But before I dive into this question, let me just quickly make a point about the last question I was asked, the legal framework. Now, the point is, and just to close on that, is that there is no one specific law in Nigeria that obligation does not exist on employees. But there are circumstances where an employee will have to disclose his mental health issues. For instance, if the employee has severe mental health issues which affect his ability to perform his role, so that he is not able to be as productive as he should be in the office. In such a situation, he is obliged to disclose that situation, that condition, to his employer, so that the employer can make can put policies in place to accommodate him, to make necessary adjustments for him to be able to function optimally, and discharge his responsibilities. Because if he doesn't disclose, then it is possible that he may be seen as underperforming. He may be seen as underperforming, less than productive, and that may ultimately lead to him being given the sack. So it is very, very important for him to come clean, for him to be honest, for him to say, these are the challenges I have, Mr. Boss, please, how do we deal with it? And once that disclosure is made, there is a corresponding obligation on the employer to keep the confidential information confident as well. You don't go disclosing it to other employees. What you need to do is to activate policies in place that will address the specific needs of that employee. For instance, do you need to give him more flexible hours so that he's able to work in a way that reduces the stresses and the pressures upon him? Those sort of things. And your next question, I believe, talked about the requirement under Section 8 of the Labor Act, whether an employee is that requirement includes mental health. Well, I would say yes, because if we talk about mental health, we are talking about total wellness, complete wellness. So if an employer has to conduct the tests prescribed under Section 8 for a prospective employee, then that, it's a no-brainer that test should include health tests for the employee. And I believe that even at intervals during the course of the employment of the employee should be made to undergo the general medical tests, you know, so that we are careful that we don't single out, because of stigmatization, mental tests only. That general test should be repeated from time to time, which includes the mental health test. Now, on the question of whether an employer can be vicariously liable, for me, that will depend on the extent. Generally, an employer is not liable for the conduct of his employee. But don't forget that the employer has the obligation to provide a safe working environment for the employees. That is an obligation. And then he also owes his employees a duty of care. So, given the totality of that, he is under obligation to ensure that his employees' conduct as such as are not detrimental to other employees, such as do not affect the well-being and safety of other employees. And that is where, like I mentioned earlier, the question of disclosure becomes very important by a medical issue. Because when you disclose to your employer, he's able to put safeguards and checks in place to protect you and protect other employees. But if the disclosure is not made and then somebody becomes hot in the process, in the office, then in that situation, I will think that the employer may not be liable because he's not aware. But if he's aware, then I think he will be vicariously liable if he has that knowledge. Now, the Section 28 Criminal Code insanity point, for me, is taking it really to the extreme, because we are not talking about full-blown insanity, madness, a situation that will require psychiatric attention. And as you will agree with me, generally, such an employee may not at that point be fit and proper to be in the workplace, and may have to be relieved to go and take treatment. But assuming we deal with, I'm not an expert, and I think Dr. Maymunah will throw more light on this aspect. But assuming we are dealing with a suspicion of momentary illness, whereby if somebody, you know, behaves in such a way that he becomes a threat to others as a result of some mental health issues in the workplace, and a co-worker, a employee be injured or threatened in such a way that his safety is no longer assured, then I think the employer also in that circumstances may be held liable. Don't forget, it's just like the sexual harassment cases we have in Nigeria recently. You saw what the National Industrial Court did. You don't have to go to the extent of holding employers vicariously liable for sexual harassment, where they fail to activate policies, you know, to prevent such from happening in the workplace. I think I would draw a similar analogy to the situation here. If the employer does not do what he's supposed to do, then of course he will be vicariously liable for any injurious action of the employee. I'll leave it at that.
Thank you very much, Godwin. Thank you very much. That's quite exhaustive on that topic. But the other underlying issues from that topic and from that area, I think we'll take it up again, because it takes me back to what Folabi said about the British case. And we must also draw a distinction, because under England and Welsh laws, mental health issues classed as disability, right? And so you can be discriminated against on the basis of your mental health, right? So it's slightly different. I think they've gone far way ahead of us. And they're not talking about insanity. They're talking of a spectrum of issues, from PTSD to schizophrenia to anxiety to panic attack. And so it's classed as a disability and you can be discriminated against based on some of these aspects. But we'll deal with that later. But I mean, just to come back to you, post-traumatic stress disorder is on the spectrum of mental illness, right? Is it something that is known under our law? Is there a provision for that under our law? And as it is today, can an employer be held liable for mental stress as a result of asking an employee to work from home, making his or her job more tasking, resulting in mental stress? Can an employer be held liable for that under our law as it is today?
Okay, all right. Well, I'd like to put it in context, and then in answering this, I would probably draw one or two things from what the letter I just said in answer, because I mean, there's some correlation somewhere. Now, there is no denying the fact, or it cannot be overstated that, we can't overstate the fact that a conducive working environment or workplace and good mental state or health of the employees and employer, there's a correlation that you cannot ignore. As to the question, and relating that to the question of PTSD, whether it's in our law or in any of our labor laws, the answer is yes, to an extent, but largely no. When you look at the letters of our local legislation, you are not likely to find it in any of our local legislations on labor, because those legislations are dated. Earlier on, I said the Labor Act was made in 1974. You will not find the phrase employer-employee in the Labor Act. What you find is an employer-worker. That's all you have in the Labor Act. So the worker was seen as a factor of production, and it could not have been bothered. I mean, the employer could not have been bothered whether at any point in time he was depressed or not. All he had to do was to do the work. So we start from that, and then gradually you come to the other 4 or 5 laws that basically deal with this area. But thankfully, the 2010 third alteration to the Constitution has now allowed the industrial court, like I said earlier on, the adjudicatory body to look into any of this. And I like to say it in that context, to look into what obtains elsewhere. So when you made a distinction that, well, in the UK, they might have gone this way, they have gone this way and all of that, we should not lose the fact that based on fact circumstance, and perhaps the need to depart from local circumstances as may be appropriate, the court here, or this examination of issues will still be in the context of what obtains here and what obtains elsewhere. And I think it's even in the light of that, that the rules of that court makes a provision that you are allowed to ask the court to apply what obtains elsewhere as international best labor practices or standard, provided you plead it, and you must make sure that it's in your pleading, is in the paper you are filing before the court, that this is the particular practice or convention that you are asking the court, that you have exhausted our laws is not here, but is applicable in Wales, is applicable in Germany, is applicable just about anywhere. So to that extent, I would say yes, it is. PTSD, to the extent that it can be called based on the fact and put before the court, I would say yes, it can be. It's one that can be argued that it's within the confine of our law. So, and on the issue of PTSD, I think that's okay. Now, going to the next question as to whether the employer can be made liable for whatever stress that the employee has undergone in the course of working virtually. Let me quickly draw an analogy. You know, in the light of the global public health crisis that's happened, and then the attendant meltdown of virtually everything, not just economics, even mental state, depression on the rise, as Dr. Maymunah alluded that I think 1 out of every 8 and all of that. Now, some Fortune 500 companies got together, the HR, and had some, specifically in implementing mental-related policy into their handbook or the employment manual, got together and eventually came to some finding, I mean, which is very close to some of those things that were made up. Look, in the light of it is likely to affect a lot of the employees, even when they are working remotely. So what we should implement or put in place is to have a policy where you ask certain employees, depending on what you pick at the earliest opportunity, could be a negative influence from the way they carry on their work or the way they behave. To see a psychiatrist, to see a psychologist. So they are beginning to have all these policies in place. Now, we do not have that. But thankfully, we said that, oh, the sexual harassment thing and all of that, the company was made liable, vicariously liable. Nothing stops in the event or depending on what is before being submitted, nothing stops such an employer from still being made vicariously liable if in the conduct or in the process of the employee carrying out their work in a particular manner, he just a party from being made to be answerable to that one. Two, as to whether the employer can be answerable for any injury or, any accident that is suffered in the course of working remotely or virtually from home. Again, it would depend on the particular fact. The answer cannot just be easily made to be yes, it may, yes, it may. Yes, the answer is yes, it may, yes, it may not, but definitely not that it would be in all instances. So it will be examined keenly to see whether it is in the context of it that it will be made liable.
Okay. Thank you very much, Folabi. Just to come back to you on this issue of PTSD, wouldn't you say Section 8 of Sub 1 and 2 of the Employee Compensation Act is some form of window to apply the PTSD doctrine there? Okay.
Now, when you, again, I said that, look at a law in the context of what it was. ECA, I thought examining PTSD is from the context of what framework can the employer put in place to ensure that you guide toward an employee not suffering from post-traumatic disorder. Clearly, if it is what the regime of relief, what is the regime of damages, what is the regime of what's the court? Don't forget, ECA, when you mention ECA, you're already looking at adjudication. You're already looking at, oh, I claim that I've suffered PTSD, and despite that, you are still giving me this much work, it has affected me, and I make a claim, and you say no. Then we now say, oh, this is ECA. Then you are looking at a third-party adjudicatory body saying that this is what's ECA. But my position here is that let us not even as much as go through the ECA. Okay. Let us see, is there anything that we can put in place to prevent the applicability of ECA? ECA is, like I said earlier, medicine is about preventive, not necessarily about curative anymore. So that's the point.
Fair point. Yes. Okay. Back to you, Dr. Maymunah. We'll have to quickly round up now so we can take some questions. So I'll just ask for everyone to keep it to 2 minutes, if you can, please, so that we can quickly round up and take some questions, which we already have popping up on the screen. Dr. Maymunah, I think you've touched on this a bit. So, and you've talked about the EAPs, Employee Assistance Programs, which is some form of intervention, and we both understand that, and that's clearly important. Well, it's one thing to have an EAP in place. It's another thing for the employees to actually access the EAP. So what kind of processes, what kind of policies have to be in place for the employee to be comfortable enough to take that step? At what point of it, what needs to be done to make the employee quite comfortable? What guarantees does the employee need to be comfortable enough to take that step?
Thank you very much for this question, and I think it's very, very, very important at this point in time. So I'm going to use the very relatable example on how it is being deployed right now in Nigeria. So if we are to set up an EAP for any organization, there are rules. The SLE will be signed, and in the service legal agreement we are going to have with this organization, depending on who is the relationship officer we have in that organization, whether it's the HR head or somebody else, the rule is that for every month we are supplying you with the people, the employees that have utilized this service, no names will be mentioned. We are going to tell you the gender, we are going to tell you the symptoms, we are going to tell you, all other things about data, but not the name. The reason why names are not put in place is also to protect that employee, but we have all the data on our own side. Of course, there's a route to, route to protect, and of course the route to also protect and, care for. So I give you a typical example. Last year, an employee of a particular organization wrote to us. So they are deployed phone numbers, WhatsApp numbers, dedicated emails. And the employee of the organization said, look, I'm going to take my life so day and so exact time. And that day was like a 10th of that month. And this employee said he would do that 10th of the following month. And we said, okay, come in, we want to see you. And so because the EAP has different services under it, all limited telephonic counseling in a protected, safe space, not judgmental, no criticism. And of course, the rule is that it can be apostolic. Then of course, it has the services of a face-to-face interaction. Of course, with the remote working and the pandemic, we leverage on technology to deploy that. And so the employee left the organization and was coming to our place. It got to a particular level in the Lekki Expressway and turned back. So we knew there was an issue because he was chatting with us. So we, as an EAP service provider, we are also binded by that law to protect and, of course, care for that organization, because that person could be at risk to himself or to the other person. We got to that staff's house 1 a.m. that day. Why? Because we had it in mind that if you say 10th of January that you are going to do this, and we are in 10th of December, what tells us that you are not going to do it that day? Why do we have to wait for 10th of January? So we got to his house with the crisis intervention team, got the staff to stay with that staff team, with that employee team morning, and brought him in for admission. And that was how we are able to save that crisis. So you don't just leave things to chance. You don't just leave things to say, he has said 10th of January. Meanwhile, today is 10th of December, and he could actually do that. So in deploying those services, is very key that it is in all ramification. The organization build, let them know that this service is available. So there's a general training for every member of that organization, whether it's a bank, it's a telecoms, you train everybody to be aware that this service is available. Then there are monthly newsletters deployed to that organization that they send via their intranet to all employees, letting them know that EAP service is available, is confidential, it's a safe space for you, there's no judgment there, you won't be criticized, and your name will not be submitted to us as an organization. Is a law. If you don't agree to that term with us, we do not deploy that service, because we do understand that it can be used. I've heard all the legal terminology, all the legal policies put in place, and all that from all my all the learned colleagues. I'm a lawyer by association. I'm not a lawyer, but I'm a lawyer. So the truth is that we do understand the workplace environment, and I do still see some organization that we are working with, and they're like, are you sure this employee can still work with us? Are you sure it's not a danger to himself or to other people? Are you sure? I know, and I like what our learners said about work redesigning, work schedule. So we've had employees of organizations where we recommend and say, look, can you give them flexible working hours? Can you change their department? Can you move? And it has worked, because a pretty face, they will say, okay, this person is supposed to be in customer services, but that person has social anxiety. So how do you want to put somebody who has social anxiety just because the person has a pretty face in the front desk that cannot really relate? So if all organizations can take charge and deploy employee assistance program to the organization, they'll be more well informed on even a general survey to just know what are your employees at risk of. And to build a business case for your organization to say, look, 50% of my workforce, they are more at risk of stress or at depression. And of course, there are things that can be done. Most mental related issues are treatable, and treatment is available. Despite the fact we know we have limited number of resources there, but they are treatable. So, and these things are already being done. We don't want to reinvent the wheel. It's creating that awareness for every employer of labor to know that certain individuals, and because we are all unique in our own different way, we have our strength. How much have you harnessed the strength of your employees, instead of you assuming that the employee will be best in this, meanwhile the employee in the true sense of it is best at doing that?
Thank you, Doctor. I will come back to you again on that, but I would just like us to dovetail into another area which you kind of touched on when you were talking through that question, which is the issue of confidentiality. Right. So I will start with the learner's sake. Can an ex-employer actually ask a current employer about the mental health issues that a prospective employee had gone through? Would that ex-employer have an obligation to provide those kind of information?
Thank you, Ose, for that question. And my simple answer will be straightforward, no. And I will explain you, I will give you 2 reasons why I say no. First, like I had alluded to earlier, there is a body of case law in Nigeria which says that whenever information is given to you in confidence, then you have an obligation to keep that confidential information confidential. So, and that is a continuing obligation. It does not matter that the employee has left the services of his ex-employer. The obligation survives that employer-employee relationship. Now, the second perspective to this is to look at the Section 26 of the National Health Act, which again is a law in this country and makes it an obligation for an employer to keep confidential the information, health information received from an employee while that employee was in his employment. And thirdly, I do not see any obligation between the ex-employer or I do not see any obligation between the ex-employer and the prospective employer why that obligation that is imposed by law should be breached. So my answer is no. Do not disclose it, no matter what the situation. Let the prospective employer who wants to employ activate his own internal processes and procedures to get the requisite information that he needs from the employee.
I think you more or less dealt with that. Folabi,
yes,
there's another aspect of the confidentiality issue I want to raise with you. Can the employer, at his own behest, without cause, ask employees to take mental health check tests? Would they be running foul of any law if they ask to do that? If they ask employees to do that?
Okay, thank you. I'd like to answer that in 2 ways. The first one is that as to whether there is any law forbidding that, the answer is no. Okay. But again, beyond the express letters of the law, beyond black letters law, we should also recognize that the employee has rights, and rights constitutionally provided and guaranteed. So the mere fact that there has not been a written law does not mean that should depart from what is expressly written to be privacy law, for example, and which to an extent you have to consider in the light of labor law standard discriminatory practices. The reason that we all know that those pre-employment checks are usually made is to be able to make an informed decision on the one hand, and in the process of making an informed decision one way or the other as to whether to proceed with that employee or not, there's a borderline of discrimination or discriminatory practice that could come from. And I'll give an example. HIV, for example, the National Health Act that had actually been made stipulates certain steps, checks that can be made and all of that. But it's been criminalized in Lagos State, that cannot be the basis upon which you discriminate whether you would employ or not employ an individual. And that law was made in the light of recognition of the rights of the employee of individual, and which has now been judicially tested and accepted in a decision of the National Industrial Court, Smith's case. Now, so yes, the employer can ask that the employee should subject to mental health. But again, it must be borne in mind at every point in time that it's a delicate one. So the process must be with the consent. That's where I'm traveling to, with the consent. So it is part of the Decent Work Agenda recognizes that there's participatory democracy. You don't impose anything on me. You try as much as possible to put in place a process where you extract or elicit an information with me giving willingly or with my consent. And we shouldn't forget data protection laws. Now we have data protection law, which says is a data controller of such information. So when you're asking him to go for that test and you want, what do you want the test for? You need the result of the test. You want to know, to evaluate his mental health and all of that. So the point is that there's a need to obtain the consent. Yes, it can, but there's a need to obtain the consent. So it's a two-way thing. That's the point I seek to make about that. Yeah.
Also, if I may just chip on that before you go to Maymunah. Now, in addition to what Folabi has said, right, that is a tricky area. And I will say that we have an obligation, our courts, to import international best practice on this issue. And what is international best practice on this particular issue? International best practice is that, I mean, from the UK Employment Equality Act 2010, the Canadian Human Rights Act as well, and the Disability Discrimination Act of Australia. Now, when we talk about human best practice, the recommendation has been that an employer should not ask that question, that specific question. Go and take a mental health test. That is the recommendation. And I will tell you why shortly. The standard is that an employer can develop a questionnaire that asks a set of questions around that issue, but not directly. So, okay, for instance, what sort of issues will prevent you from performing your role as an employee effectively? Do you have any such issues? So indirectly, and the whole idea is because, like Folabi said, the employee has a right, the prospective employee has a right. If at the end of the day, he's asked that specific question and it turns out that he or she is not employed, then it becomes a likely ground for proceeding against the employer for discrimination. So for me, those are the points, and I thought I should just chip that in before you proceed to Maymunah. Thank you.
Guys, I'm liking this perspectives, and I make bold to say that this has to be an ongoing conversation.
Yes, it's
not a conversation we'll finish discussing in one webinar. It's something that we will keep discussing, and we'll keep exchanging ideas and as to what works best for our own particular situation. And so we have a whole lot of questions here, and I would like us to take on some of those questions. The first one that sticks out really, and is something I also know, there's this question about mental illness seems to be widely endorsed. Stigmas about mental illness seem to be widely endorsed by the general public in Nigeria as negative. How can we change that narrative? So starting with you, Doctor, in a minute, please, how do you think we can change that narrative?
This is a forum for that. This is a forum. Changing narrative starts with me, starts with you, starts with everyone. So if all of us are equipped with information, we'll be able to access our mental health resources from the right places, the right people, and of course the right time. We do understand that there are a lot of the stigma and discrimination is huge, but it's not something you're going to deal with in a day. It has to be public enlightenment, empowerment, the radio, the TV houses, people reducing the negativity, then our Nollywood, not making mental health look as if you have to be on the street, picking trash, you must be naked. Let me tell you one thing. Because mental health challenges are on the spectrum, right? Only 1% of those with mental illnesses are actually on the street. Only 1%. This then means that 99% is you and I, everybody on this platform. It is called package madness. People are all, we are all dressed now. For those of us that are on video, we are all dressed. Nobody knows whether I've just taken my antidepressant and I'm here discussing with us. It's called package madness. We all package ourselves and we all look good. Post-traumatic stress disorder that Mr. Folabi talked about is a disorder you cannot make a diagnosis immediately. It's called post-traumatic because it's a diagnosis you must make 3 to 6 months after the trauma. So you might have had a crisis in March, and then you resume in an office in June. And that is when the diagnosis is being made. So you see where that spectrum is. So this package madness is what we should all look into. Because at the end of the day, if we do not amplify this discussion, because we've already started the conversation, is amplification and putting a hashtag and making every work environment, every individual understand that we all have mental health, but we do not have mental illness, and nobody, I repeat, absolutely, even Maymunah, right now speaking, do not have immunity against mental illness. I can break down because I'm only but human. So we have to bring humanity to discussing when it comes to mental health, because together, truly, we are stronger. What will make this happen?
Thank you. Thank you. Let us see. What's your take? How do you think we can change this narrative?
Well, Maymunah talked about package of everybody. I think that brings to mind a statistics I saw a long time ago, which said that every human being has about 2 to 3% of madness in him or her, on that point. Let me just scare us a bit. We started this discussion by looking at statistics. If you look at a statistical report that came out of Australia recently, it showed that 60% of people, employees, who self-reported mental health issues, right, were subsequently discriminated against, compared to 80% of people who did not self-report mental health issues. So it tells us that it's a big issue that we are dealing with at the moment. And I think, like Maymunah has said, we cannot run away from one, education, enlightenment. We have to educate people, we have to enlighten people, we have to make people understand that stigmatization, cultural and social taboos will not work. And of course, we have to make provision for accommodation. We must learn to accommodate, we must learn to be tolerant, we must learn to make adjustments to be able to accommodate the needs of those with mental health issues. Otherwise, we'll be running a very dangerous race. Let me leave it at that.
Okay, very much. I'm going to be over to you. What's your take? How do you think we can begin to change this narrative?
Sorry.
Yes, I'll be over to you. Yes.
Oh, thank you. As Dr. Maymunah spoke about package madness, package insanity, I was forced to recall Jack Nicholson in One Flew Over the Cuckoo Nest. At some point, he even started questioning his sanity. Yeah. He could dress well and all that. Okay, my thoughts. Of course, we could make it ingrained. There should be conscious effort in the workplace. I'm talking about conscious effort and ensuring that we put in place a policy that ensures that the mental faculty facilities that are well in place of employees, because it's a broad bill. We can only continue to look at what opinions earlier on the legislative reference to what opinions were in relation to this, not to ask the question. But locally, I'm aware of the decision of the industrial where a doctor was asked to go for a test, medical fitness, and he sued that was a breach of his dignity to his human person, dignity of human rights, certain rights protected in the Constitution. And the court said that there was nothing wrong with it at the end of the day. That's Dr. Adeyelu and Luke, important decision. So locally it is accepted. The most important thing is that it should not be established that it was being obtained, it is being sought for to discriminate. What the law looks at is discrimination. The law does not draw a line that the court, the employer can act, knowing fully well that the employer at every point in time has a duty of care to ensure that the co-employees, they are not endangered by somebody with health or mental health impairment. So that's the line I would probably say at every point in time we must be conscious of. There's nothing wrong with it. Like I said, in light of what has happened, what the world is facing, the meltdown, the crisis, public health crisis, and all of that. The statistics will continue to be an upscale. If before what we had was 1 out of every 8 person likely to suffer depression, it's now likely to be 2 or 3 in the light of what everybody's facing and all that. So there's nothing wrong in having in place or putting in place a policy that perhaps wants to check the mental fitness of individuals. And then mental fitness, when it is used loosely, even though it seems to carry stigma. The moment you hear mental, it covers quite a lot. And the doctor was talking about PT even going beyond what we would have looked at and then sum up in one single word. But of the truth, lunacy acts. You can imagine, I mean, the carries quite a lot of stigma. So employers should be conscious that there's a need to put in place to ensure that the employee is a well-rounded individual, that the physical and the mental factors are in place. Adele said that the ILO Convention 155 and 161 places a lot of premium on both. So, but in doing that, ensure that it is not likely to give rise to a claim of discrimination, a breach of my data rights. So those are just in the absence of that, it should be a high premium at work. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Well, thanks a lot for that. And I agree with you. In terms of frameworks, the ILO Convention 155 and 161 is quite clear on health and safety and psychological well-being as part of the decent work agenda, and very, very clear, very specific on that. It moves away from the traditional health and safety policies to psychological well-being for the first time. And okay, so Dr. Maymunah, this question is directed at you. Someone asked a question to say, how can I speak to someone who has depression or is suffering from anxiety?
Thank you for the person who asked the question. Very important, especially when it comes to the work environment. Maybe the EAP is not yet deployed, but how do you help such an individual? Let's use the ICU approach. I'm not talking about being in the hospital and locked up in the ICU. There's an acronym, the ICU approach. The idea is identify the issue the person is having. So for you to say this person may be dealing with anxiety or depression, that means you have noticed a change. It then means that there's something about this individual working with you or you've been with in the past few weeks or few months that has changed, and you are like, okay, there's something there. So the first point of call is to walk up to this individual and, just talk to him or her in a very friendly, nice way, using the sandwich approach. Mr. XYZ, we've been together in this workplace for the past how many months or how many years. Yeah, you've been awesome. You've done this. But recently, in the past 2 weeks or in the past 1 month, I noticed this. Is there something you want to let me know? Is there something you want to share with me? Is there, any way I can help you? So you've identified there's a problem. The C here, you are connecting with this individual and letting the individual, you are building a rapport, you are building trust, you are giving that person that safe space. Even if you are not a professional, if you deploy the ICU approach, you are able to hit it. You are not going to say, look at you. We've been together for the past 2 years, so all of a sudden I'm not behaving somehow. I think, don't use your own to affect my own. Please stay in your lane, let me stay in my lane. That is the way you see a lot of people just, attack the individual. And if, for example, that person is already suicidal, this is what you are just, reenacting in the person's brain. I'm not loved, I'm not wanted. And then you are, the closest person to that individual in the workplace is not telling him or her, look, don't use your own to affect me. Please stay in your lane. No. All this one that you are misbehaving, I can't even tolerate it. It does for that the person is not loved. And then you wake up and the person has killed him or herself. Let's not forget there's smiling depression. There's high functioning depression in the workplace. The person is depressed, but it's always very jovial, very accommodating, and nobody knows his or her own issues. High functioning, they will do their work, do everybody's work. Even those with bipolar affective disorder, especially in their manic phase, they are very productive. And then you won't even know that this person is having this issue. And they come to workplace the following, the person asking himself, how do you feel? How will you even feel? So using the ICU approach, it is very relatable and you don't have to be a professional. So identify the issues, use that sandwich approach to relate, connect with this individual, and then you just understanding with this individual and creating a way forward. What is the way forward? Harnessing the resources if your organization already have EAP. If they don't, then because the EAP approach also encourages employees to call for another employee. It doesn't have to be you, but you can help and say, look, why don't you, key into the EAP policy, call them, do you want me to call them for you? Or you help the individual say, look, I don't know anybody, but let's go on Google and research where you can get support. And they go on Google, they find out places where they can reach out to. Internet of Things has it has everything at your beck and corner. You can even fix an appointment if you have the chance. Book the appointment and go with that individual. The ICU approach is anything anyone can use anywhere in the world. With that, that person can tell you his or her own issues. But this is the thing you have to look at. Please don't judge this individual. Please don't criticize this individual. Please don't be apostolic. We are Nigerians and I know what I'm talking about. Don't start telling a person, look, hey, you have to come to MFM. That church you are going to, they are not praying enough. You have to fast and pray. No. It bridge. In fact, you have just that doesn't mean the person is not fasting and praying. It just means that you know what? Even we have admitted pastors of parishes before that have 1,000 followers in their parishes, and they are telling their followers that, look, I hear the voice of God telling you that you are going to have a house in the next 3 months. It's hallucination. It only takes me as a clinician to delineate between hallucination and hearing the voice of God. So please, when you use the ICU approach, don't be apostolic in your approach. Don't tell the person, you have to fast and pray, because it is because your sins that you have committed, they are coming back to you right now. No, you don't do that. If you don't have anything to say to this individual, 3 words are very easy for you to say. I am here. Very easy.
Thank you very much, Dr. Maymunah. And I'm being very careful. So because I was going to twist this again to say that can it be the case that our religious beliefs, over religiousness, could also be a factor and a trigger?
It is, Ose. Truly, there's a thin line between religiosity and over-religiosity. In fact, the over-religiosity is a common symptom among people with paranoid schizophrenia. So the word that everybody should look out for is change. What has changed in this individual? That's just what it is. Because some of the pastors we have seen, the followers in the church did not know there were issues. The wives that knew there were issues, because everything is okay. Everybody got everything in the church. They said everything. Even some imams. We've had an imam that we've admitted. And do you know what this man was dealing with? Everybody thought it was depression. At the end of the day, because you want to do a holistic approach, he was addicted to marijuana. And how was he addicted? The kettle that Muslims use in performing ablution, that was where he was soaking his marijuana leaves. And there's that Islamic belief that when you drink water from the kettle, it helps you suppress your anger. So this man was always drinking water from the kettle. And nobody will ever think that he soaks the marijuana leaves in the kettle. So see, there are so many things that we are faced with. And at the end of the day, this man was admitted for 2 months. He got discharged. In the next 6 weeks, he came back. It was the wife that discovered that he used to soak marijuana leaves in that kettle. Because he was always drinking water from there. He performed ablution. Nobody ever knew it was marijuana. So we said, look, this man has THC in his system, tetrahydrocannabinoid. How? You said he has a big mosque, it's the malam of a mosque. How can it be positive for marijuana? The woman said, I have to look at what, I said, look at what it does on a day-to-day basis. And at the end of the day, it was that kettle that they found out that he soaked his leaves. So the thin line between hallucination and hearing the voice of God is there. So over-religiosity is a symptom of quite a number of people with paranoid schizophrenia. Either they are over-religious or they go to the other extreme and say God has forsaken them, God doesn't care for them, and so they don't, in fact, they stop going to church, they stop praying. We've had people like that.
I think I've opened the Pandora's box, but I need to stop at this point. We are running out of time, and we have literally a minute to go. So at this point, I would like to thank you very much for being part of this. We'll come back to you guys again, and I would like to call on the Assistant Secretary of the committee to say the final closing words here. Bayo, please.
Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. I'd like to appreciate panelists. Dr. Maymunah, it's a pleasure hearing you speak. And I can assure you many people hold the same view. Mr. Folabi, my big brother, thank you so much. It's always a pleasure hearing you discuss law. And you didn't drop the ball today. And the learned Silk, we are so very, very grateful that you found time to be with us on this webinar. I'd also like to thank all the participants who joined us and stayed with us all through. The good thing we'd like to see is to you put these things you've learned into action, not just to join. We'd like to see put them for employers. We'd like to see put some of these things in practice, and for employees too. We want to see you take the learning and apply them as may be necessary. We also like to appreciate Business Day for providing this platform to reach out to people. And as Ose said, we are still going to come back to every one of us, and we're still going to invite you next month for the next edition. So you can please start anticipating. Thank you very much.
Thank you. One last word from you.
Thank you, everyone. Dr. Maymunah, this has been absolutely interesting. First, you have just told us that only 1% of those who have mental illness are actually on the streets. So they are actually in the offices with us. We see them every day.
Yeah.
That's correct.
Yeah.
That's what it is.
It's called package madness. There are so many of us here. We are so many, you know, and of course, you wouldn't even know what anybody is doing with. You just come and then everybody just smile and do what he or she has to do. But we do understand that we have a whole lot locked up behind.
Thank you very much, ever so much, for coming. And we look forward to more of these conversations again.